I would rather kill my kids than see them in care. I gave them life and I can take it away. And I think there was a sort of an audible gasp when that was read out, because it's just such a abhorrent and shocking thing to say about your own children. It perhaps gives some insight into why she did what she did, though. We heard some of their victim impact statements about how they feel about themselves, and in a heartbreaking sort of revelation from one of the eldest surviving children, they described how they're concerned they might grow up to be a murderer themselves, which is such an incredible and horrible burden for a young child to have to be carrying, in addition to everything else they've already been through. On the 24th of May 2019, the Star's early morning reporters began to receive tip-offs that something serious had happened at a school in the Shire Green area of Sheffield. When we got to the scene, and we found that an air ambulance had landed in the school field. I think it was possibly the only big plot of land in the area, and that a house on Greg House Road in Shire Green had been cordoned off. It's quite normal that you'll receive tip-offs but not really have any idea of what's happened in an area. You just go as a journalist and you try and find out. And the reality of what had happened was far worse than we could ever have imagined. Sadly, we were later to learn that 14-year-old Blake Barrass and 13-year-old Tristan Barrass had been murdered. Subsequently, their parents, Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin, pleaded guilty to not only murdering Blake and Tristan, but to conspiring to kill their other 4 children during a nightmarish incident that took place over the 23rd and 24th of May 2019. I was the court reporter. I was one of several members of press, including many national members of press, in court when Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin were sentenced, and what we were told was that essentially the pair hatched a plot to kill all 6 of the children, and they also intended to then kill themselves. And it seems to be that the trigger for hatching the plot was that the social services involved with the family had informed them that the family would go from having a child in need status to a child in protection status, which comes with a greater level of scrutiny, and they were concerned about what that would mean for them. Unbeknownst to even the children in the family, Brandon Machin and Sarah Barrass were having a sexual relationship, and this was particularly shocking because they were half brother and sister, and Machin had actually fathered all 6 of the children. And so the pair hatched a plot to kill all 6 children, and on the evening of the 23rd of May, Sarah Barrass began giving the children what she believed would be an overdose of medication prescribed to the children. But sort of in the early hours of the morning of the 24th, it became clear that attempted overdose had not worked. She began Googling methods about poisoning and also how long it takes for overdoses to work. And she then contacted her half-brother and lover, Machin, and he got a taxi over to the property on Greg House Road in the early hours of the 24th. What followed is pretty distressing to hear. The pair then strangled both Blake and Tristan, and to ensure that they would be killed, they also placed bin bags over their heads. You try to have a certain level of professional distance from the cases because you are listening to very, as you say, harrowing details day in and day out. But I found it particularly difficult to not be emotionally affected by the details of this case. You know, those poor boys lost their lives in the most unimaginable ways. Not only were they killed in such a terrible way, but they were also killed by their parents, the people they should have been able to trust the most. So on the first day that Sarah Barrass and Brandon Machin first appeared at court. It was a couple of days after the shocking crimes, and the press bench was absolutely full. And it was quite strange because Sarah Barrass sort of appeared at court in this off-the-shoulder floral dress, and she seemed almost like she was dressed for a night out, not for the first Crown Court appearance, when she was accused of killing her 2 eldest boys and attempting to kill the 4 other children. And we couldn't report it at the time because there were certain rules that applied to hearings, but she shouted something along the lines of, "I didn't kill my boys, I love them." And so we kind of expected that there'd be a trial. And so it was quite a surprise when a couple of months later, both she and Machin pleaded guilty to all charges they faced. And so on the day of sentencing, not only was the press bench completely packed with members of the press having to sit in the jury box, but the public gallery, which was above the court, so you had people sort of looking down on the 2 defendants, was completely full, and it felt very, very tense. And because they pleaded guilty and there wasn't a trial, the first time that we really got to hear about what had happened was on the day of the sentencing. And the prosecuting barrister on that day was a lady called Carmeli, now King's Counsel. She was Queen's Counsel at the time. And I've seen her previously defend murderers in court, and she's, seemingly not been affected by it. But when she read out the terrible details of what had happened to Blake and Tristan, she seemed tearful and her voice was quivering. And so it was really difficult to hear in court how the elder 2 children, who were old enough to remember not only what happened to their brothers, but their parents trying to kill them. We heard some of their victim impact statements about how they feel about themselves, and in a heartbreaking sort of revelation from one of the eldest surviving children, they described how they're concerned they might grow up to be a murderer themselves, which is such an incredible and horrible burden for a young child to have to be carrying, in addition to everything else they've already been through. Initially it was quite difficult to report on the case because a key facet of the case was the relationship, which was described as unnatural in court, remembering that they were half brother and sister who were clearly in a sexual relationship. And there was also a reporting restriction on the case which prohibited all members of the media from reporting on the relationship between the 2, and we felt, the Star and other members of the press felt, that it was a key component to understanding exactly why they hatched that murderous plan. And so the Star, along with other members of the press, submitted an application for that reporting restriction to be lifted, and it was lifted after the pair were sentenced. And so up until that point, you had to report on things in quite a restricted way. We feel that we were glad that Mr. Justice Goss in the end decided that it was necessary to remove that reporting restriction, because we felt it, those 2 boys deserved to have exactly what happened and why it happened put into the public domain with accurate reporting. Yeah, there's one particular quote from Sarah Barrass which she said to her brother and lover Brandon the night that the murderous plot was enacted. She said to him, "I would rather kill my kids than see them in care. I gave them life and I can take it away." And I think there was sort of an audible gasp when that was read out, because it's just such a abhorrent and shocking thing to say about your own children. It perhaps gives some insight into why she did what she did, though. Blake and Tristan's funeral was attended by hundreds of mourners, huge turnout, and Blake and Tristan were known for being fanatical about cars and motorbikes, and so local riders in the area were asked to take part in a cortege, and there were 300 motorbikes that took part in it, which is an incredible turnout, and I think it's representative of the Sheffield community spirit. And in addition to the 300 motorbike, there was also 2 Lamborghinis, so obviously it's the most tragic of circumstances, but Sheffield has really helped to give Blake and Tristan the send-off that they deserved. As you can see behind me, the property is no longer standing. It was demolished in February 2021. I think it's a sign of respect to Blake and Tristan. The decision was made by the Sanctuary Group, who leased the house to Sarah Barrass. And a memorial tree has been planted, and a garden's been left here where people can come and remember Blake and Tristan and pay their respects to them. As a seasoned court reporter, I'm fairly used to dealing with difficult, sometimes gruesome cases, but this is definitely one that sticks in my mind. It was so heartbreaking to hear the details of it, and obviously, sometimes you hear a lot more detail than you'd ever want to put in a family newspaper, and some of the graphic details, they were hard to hear, but in cases like this, it's important that the public see that justice is done, and so that's why we do it. And
how do you feel being here at the spot where the two boys were killed?
This is actually the first time that I've been here, because I wasn't working on the day that it happened, and it's hard to imagine the horrendous suffering that those two poor boys must have endured at this property. So it's quite emotional to be here today. I think Sheffield was left in shock for months, if not years. It's hard to come to terms with the fact that these two little boys lost their lives in such a horrible way, but then for it to be revealed that it was at the hands of their own parents, that's it's tragic and heartbreaking, and I think it will stay with Sheffield for a long time.